It's not that we have mechanisms in place that make it easy to eat healthy food. The fast food, the cheapest food is unhealthy food.
One of the things I find quite challenging and at the same time frustrating is that there is such overwhelming evidence, at least from an epidemiological perspective, these large cohort observational studies that show that lifestyle factors, at least in the area of cancer, but similarly for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, these non-communicable diseases that account for the majority of deaths in our world, these diseases are modifiable through lifestyle factors. Lifestyle factors of diet, exercise, and to some degree stress management. And stress management plays a role in helping people to engage in diet and exercise. But not only is the medical establishment not understanding this and prescribing it, but even the patients that desperately want to recover from some of these diseases and prevent them, they're not willing to engage in them. And I find that and see that as such a challenge. And curious to even know, what is it that motivates people? You know, if it isn't avoiding disease and debilitation from a disease they already have. You know, what is it we can do to get people to actually change?
One of the things that is set up against people in the United States is that we live in an unhealthy society. And so it's not that we have mechanisms in place that make it easy to eat healthy food. The fast food, the cheapest food is unhealthy food. We don't really value that as a society. And then we point to the individual and we say, this is an individual responsibility. Individuals need to somehow solve this. And I actually think it's also something that individuals have to do, but it's a much larger societal issue. So I personally believe the burden shouldn't only be on the individual, but also needs to be addressed on a societal level.
Society as a whole has to take some responsibility for this, because at a governmental level and the politics and essentially you follow the money, and we see that industries are allowed to do a number of things in ignoring what the health implications are of these. So, of course, the fast food industry is specifically targeting children. The majority of food that's advertised on television is extremely unhealthy, yet they're allowed to target it in this way. The other issue, of course, is pesticides. And the pesticides that are used, you know, we've shifted away from many of them that we know were harmful, like DDT, decades ago, but there's still an excessive use of pesticides that we know cause damage. The industry, of course, says, well, it's low amounts, and you know, that one exposure is not that harmful. But the concern is this constant exposure to these different environmental toxins, and of course, pesticides being a primary one.
Now, in the U.S., we have a relatively strong organic system, but it's expensive to get that designation, and big food companies are buying up small organic companies, and when they buy those companies, they have the right then to sit on the National Organic Label Committee, and that committee decides which chemicals are allowed in organic. And so we have seen over the decades that the organic federal standards have been in place, that when it began, 77 different additives were allowed. Some of them make sense, things like baking soda. That's not going to be organic. It's a chemical that's synthesized for use in baking. But now we have over 200 that are allowed on the list. And so we're going to have to fight to be sure that organic continues to mean something in the U.S. Right now, it is the best way to reduce your exposure to pesticides.
The ideal is actually going to farmers markets and buying directly from farmers. But then you have to know what the farmer is actually doing. And so in some sense, we're flashing back, you know, 50, 100 years prior to mass agriculture in our society, almost pre-industrial revolution ways of living. And that's you know, for the majority of people in our world, not really feasible.
It's true, but I also see in it a glimmer of hope because, you know, we've talked about what's bad and, you know, very concerning, but the glimmers of hope are that farmers markets are growing, that community-sustained agriculture where people directly contract with farmers that weekly they'll receive an allotment of usually organic food. I think this bringing gardening into schools and having children learn where their food comes from and what it tastes like when it's picked ripe off of the vine as opposed to weeks earlier shipped, you know,
That's right.
from a very unripe state. I think these are very hopeful signs. And while probably most people will not raise all of their own food, and that's homesteading ideal is not something we're going to see, I think this connection back to nature and back to gardening and bringing that into the awareness of children in schools is a very positive development.